Hello, welcome to today's webinar. It's Need for Speed, how community colleges are partnering with industry to develop short-term credentials that lead to good careers. My name is Becky Klein-Collins. I'm Vice President for Research and Impact at CALE, and it's my pleasure to kick off today's webinar. CALE is a national nonprofit member organization. For those of you who don't know us, we were founded 49 years ago to help organizations succeed by providing expertise, resources, and solutions that effectively support adult learners as they navigate on and off ramps between education and employment. We partner with entities across the adult learner ecosystem to help create actionable career pathways along the journey of lifelong learning and meaningful work. Before we get started, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Just so you know, attendees are muted and not on video, but we would love to see you join in the conversation by entering your thoughts into the chat box. If you have questions for us as we go, particularly for our panelists, please enter those in the Q&A box, and then we can try and answer them either as we go or at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared with all of those who registered for this webinar. So without further ado, we'll get started. Just before we launch into the findings and talking to our panelists, just a quick definition. When we talk about short-term credentials, what do we mean exactly? For the purposes of the research report that we'll be talking about today, we really focused on three characteristics. One is they're short, obviously. What does that mean? It means it takes maybe less than a year to complete. They're valuable. They lead to high quality occupations and career pathways. And they're stackable, so they lead to potential economic mobility for people because they can return and build on those credentials towards, additional higher level credentials or formal associate and bachelor's degrees. So with this study, that we're about to publish probably early next week, we talked with 10 CALE community college members about their work with these kinds of credentials. We are lucky enough to have 3 of them with us today on this webinar. We have Sheridan Nixon from Dallas College, Alicia Ude from Bismarck State College, and Erin Pfaff McDonough from Columbus State Community College. We're really excited to have them all here. So before we turn to our panel, I'm going to ask my colleague Lana Munip, who's the Senior Director of Research at CALE, to talk about the research report that's soon to be published and some of our findings, and then we're going to let you hear from the institutions themselves.
Thank you very much, Becky, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. So just a little bit about the background of our study. As Becky talked a little bit about it earlier, the goal was really to identify best practices in developing and sustaining short-term programs. And we were looking at those specifically that were 1 year or shorter and that were industry-focused credentials. And the reason we wanted to do this was because we wanted to look at the types of programs that were affordable and quick, that would enable individuals to complete their credential and go on to a career. And of course, we wanted to focus on CALE members, not least because we knew there were a lot of exciting innovations going on in this area among our members, and we wanted to learn more about that. And then to frame our study, we really drew on the existing criteria of quality credentials that had been established by the National Skills Coalition just a couple of years ago. And since then, there have been other criteria for quality credentials. Most recently, New America came out with theirs a few months ago. So these are the institutions that we invited to participate in our study. And as Becky mentioned, the three representatives are here today. So as you can see, we have a pretty good mix of institutions from different parts of the country. And we had great diversity in terms of institution size and also in terms of their student demographics, their student body that they represented, that they served. We also had a mix of rural serving institutions and those that were located in urban areas. And then finally, we had great diversity in terms of the sort of areas of focus that these different institutions had. So these were the overall areas of excuse me, areas of exploration of our study. And really for this webinar, we're focusing more on the employer engagement and program design, and then the regional economic drivers in program design, the sort of nitty-gritty of how it's done. But the other areas that we looked at for this study were, one area we looked at was the extent to which colleges had institutionalized incremental credentialing models, and underpinning that was our interest in their credit for prior learning opportunities that they offer to their students. We also looked at equity-centered practices. So for example, the extent to which an institution would engage members of their community, their local community that maybe typically wouldn't consider post-secondary education, and whether these sort of short programs were a way to encourage those subsectors of their populations to sort of dip their toes into higher ed and potentially move on to a good career. And then the other area we looked at was related to data, and we wanted to understand better how the colleges identified whether their alumni were actually going on to the careers that they hoped they would do. And we understood that data continues to be a challenge. It's a challenge throughout the sort of non-degree credential environment. And it's talked about in the literature, it's talked about at conferences. So this is an ongoing challenge. So we were interested to learn about that. But for in terms of this webinar today, so in terms of the role of regional economic drivers and acquiring labor market intelligence, we found that the colleges were strategizing at both the regional level as well as the local level in terms of looking at labor and industry needs. Labor needs of industry, and the ways in which they use labor market intelligence really was determined by how well resourced their institutions were. So for one or two of our institutions, they had the luxury of having an actual team dedicated to just mining data on labor markets and to really produce those sort of insights, whereas in other institutions it was spread out more across different people in the organization. But in general, the colleges, they drew on regional data sources, including state agencies or economic development organizations. They use Lightcast labor market analytics, and they drew on information from industry advisory groups, of course. And then at the local level, we learned about how important it is for institutions to have close relationships and connections with their local employers to really understand better the very immediate market needs within their immediate location, as well as a way to sort of connect their alumni potentially with employers. So in terms of engaging employers on program design and development, these are the sort of three ways that we saw that this was happening. So the first way is the more traditional approach. And that is where the college engages employer/industry advisory groups, or there may be an employer industry representative serving on an advisory group. And in this way, industry has a seat at the table and they influence program design and curricula. The next approach, and we'll be hearing more about that later today, is the very industry-driven approach, and it's almost like a flip model. And this is where industry representatives really led the discussion on program development, design, and program needs. And they would sort of present action items to the college, and the college would then address those. And then the third way that we saw employer engagement, again, this is something that will also be covered in the talk today, was in the area of customized programs. And that's where colleges work with specific employers to design individual programs based on those specific needs. So just to sort of round out my intro about our study, I wanted to present our conceptualization of the non-degree high-value credential as really being situated in the center of a model that recognizes all learning. And in this model, credit for prior learning and our credit crosswalks serve as connectors between work experience, previous work experience, other life experiences, the short-term high-value credential, and then a longer term academic pursuits. And we feel that in this way, the short-term high-value credential really offers, opens up opportunities to an individual for sustained economic mobility. So that was our study in a nutshell. And I wanted to bring in our next presenter. Now, is Sheridan? Sheridan, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. I'm going to, Sheridan Nixon will present on the Dallas College context.
Thank you, Lana. Thanks so much. And so I have about 7 slides that I'll go through. The first 4 I'll go through fairly quickly, but I want to be able to give you context around who Dallas College is and what we do, and then I'll jump into the key takeaways that I think are important for this conversation. And so as we go to the next slide, my name is Sheridan Nixon, like Lana mentioned, and I serve as the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Career Connected Learning here at Dallas College. And Dallas College is a different institution than it was before the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we served over 125,000 students. We have 7 campuses within Dallas County in which we outreach and serve those students. As we go to the next slide, I'll share with you a little bit about our challenges that we have here in Dallas, or our why we do the work we do. Too many people are left behind, and we know that educational attainment can help pull individuals out of poverty. And so with our mission of changing lives through higher education, that's what we're set out to do. And so knowing this is part of the challenge, this is our why and why we do what we do. Next slide, please. So also as part of our challenges, Dallas is a growing city. And as I'm sharing here, there's 350 middle skill jobs opening every day within Dallas. And so we're focused on really creating win-wins for not only our community and the students that we serve each and every day, but also for our employers. Our employers are looking for a highly skilled, well-educated workforce. And that's what we're here to do, to be able to provide for our employers, but then also service our community and make sure that they get what they need and are meeting the goals that they have for themselves. Move to the next slide. So who are our students? And within the Office of Career Connected Learning, we really focus on what most would consider non-consumers, those individuals that not necessarily think that education is for them, and making sure that we provide them with an opportunity to be successful. And so with over, there's thousands of people moving to Dallas each year. And we want to make sure that we're focusing on the native Dallas citizen, those that are grew up here, live here, that's worked here their entire lives, first generation career seekers and job seekers, to make sure that they can participate in this economy that we have. Because Dallas is a vibrant economy, and it's a great place for Fortune 500 companies and also business development. So the big thing that we know is that poverty rates have increased by 42% since the pandemic. And so we know we have a huge challenge ahead of us. We know that talent is distributed evenly, but opportunity is not. And so that's one thing that we really want to focus on and make sure that we're providing opportunity for our community. Next slide. And so this, I like to share that we can't do this work alone. And we know that the landscape of Dallas is large, and we want to be connected to the different resources out there to be able to help and support our students. This is the approach that we take is multi-pronged in our approach. And we have many partners across the board. And so we have ISD partners within Dallas County, up to 14 ISD partners. Our Work Ready You program, which is basically our adult education and literacy. We just rebranded it as Work Ready You, be able to support language learning and basic skills. We also have our industry partners that play a really big role in helping us identify what programs, our curriculum, and making sure that our students are prepared when they come into the workforce, and also those wraparound services that are really important to make sure that students are successful. So as I'm moving to the next slide, I want to jump into our pathways and the focus on the conversation that we're having here today. As I've built up the context around it, we really want to focus on those micro-credentialing, And so you see that here in these steps. And as we build out our programs, we make sure that they're connected in a way so that a student isn't losing time or money, having to go back and take classes that don't align. And so you see that adult basic education is the first step. And that's for those students that, need language learning, need those basic skills that have really low reading levels to help them get into different classes so that they can go further and meet their goals. Next, we have the Work Ready You piece with the integrated educational training programs that we have. And those programs are focused on those micro-credentialing or industry recognized credentials. We work with our Labor Market Intelligence Center here at Dallas College to be able to identify what employers are hiring, what jobs are out there, what's most in demand, and create programming around that, looking at those industry recognized credentials and looking at our workforce education course curriculum, and also our academic course curriculum manual guides to be able to help build out programs that align with our credit programs so that our students are successful. And as you see, it continues to stack those continuing education and skills awards. We call them CESAs, are also built on top of those those micro credentials, and then lead into level 1 certificates, level 2 certificates, and then associate's degrees. And so, but we don't stop there. We make sure that we have degree pathways for our students and are really mapping these things out. And we have university partners that we work with as well to be able to support these different initiatives, focusing on reskilling and upskilling.
Great, thank you, Sheridan. So we have our next presenter is Erin Pfaff-McDonough from Columbus State Community College. Thanks, Erin.
Hi, thanks so much, Lana. Yes, so like has been announced, my name is Erin, and I am an interim project manager here at Columbus State Community College. A little bit about us, all the way here in Central Ohio. We have a large student body here, mostly comprised of part-time students and mostly comprised of non-traditional age students. So we have a whole team here dedicated to bridging the gap between work and school, and how do we marry the two, because so many of our students are juggling both at the same time. So the way that we are operating here is this idea of ultra flexibility in lockstep partnership with some of our major partners. We are very fortunate here in Columbus to be a hub for many, many, many national organizations, some of which you'll see here on this slide. This is a small snippet of the kind of partnerships we are forging and flourishing. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide. I do want to talk about 3 of our most productive partnerships and programs that we have going on here. The first one being our information technology certificate. This is a short-term non-credit certificate that you can gain in a matter of weeks, depending on if it's infrastructure and automation, cybersecurity, software development, all sorts of really cool stuff. So there's options there. And this certificate has a partnership component with one of the organizations on the previous slide that helps us develop this and what this could look like for their workforce. So these are offered completely virtual, so we're not impeding anybody's workday, right? That's a big deal. The employer acts as the recruiter, so they're mining their incumbent workspace for these students who want to upskill. And a few of our employers can either provide pre or reimbursement for costs. So a pre-reimbursement model, you'll hear me talk about that a lot, is where there's no pass-through through the worker, the student, that we invoice directly to the employer. There's usually a contract on the employer student side of that, but it is a huge benefit to the student to not have to front that money. So while we're doing this, we're setting up these programs, we're really keeping in the forefront what are the barriers that adult working students have, and being that time commitment, and then also that financial piece, because a lot of us have a mortgage or kids to pay for. So that's really where the rubber meets the road there. This specific partnership was born out of a workforce advisory council. So a lot of people on our team and at the college as a whole are very much involved in our community, whether that's a WAC, whether that's One Columbus, which is another great nonprofit here that does all of the data about our growing community and the needs of our growing community, to boards that are corporate boards, and likewise. So we really lean on heavily those resources that are organically available to us. So go ahead and go on to the next slide. The next program that I wanted to highlight today was our pharmacy technician program. And this is obtainable in about 2 or 3 semesters. So really, really short. If you want to go full-time, that's where that 2 semesters, or part-time is at 3 semesters. This is a really innovative program where you don't even have to come onto our campus to do it, even though it is a very hands-on program. We have had a pilot of this program that was actually in a community center that was identified by our employer partner, where not only were we serving their incumbent workforce space, but several zip codes around the employer's established building itself that they have identified as a place where they not only want to be a part of, but they want to help build up. So this program was running offsite at a community center with our instructors and running in tandem incumbent workforce. So they're building up those skills or upskilling, and they're also creating a pipeline to bring in some new talent as well. So that's really important when you're building these out. Again, this is pre or reimbursement. This can include an admin fee if you're looking for ways to make this sustainable for your staff, for your department. We do build in an admin fee because rolling out a whole program outside of our 4 walls is a huge lift. And one of the kind of VIP treatments that come along with these things can be with that admin fee that the students don't have to register themselves. There's someone on our staff that does that. The students don't have to purchase their own books. There's someone on our staff that orders that for them, or, a stethoscope or scrubs or whatever the case is. Again, we're trying to meet those barriers for those adults. And again, the employer is acting as the recruiter here. So we are not necessarily drawing from our open enrollment pool. This is specific to the employer. And next slide. And this basic English program is something that's relatively new and something that I've been very intimately involved with. So I'm very excited about this because here in Columbus, we have over 150,000 residents who were born outside of the US. We have a large new American population here, and we have a lot of workforce opportunities for new Americans, but they really stop at the entry level. A lot of folks come over here with more degrees than all of us on this call combined, and they still struggle to find employment only because of that language barrier. So what we did when we noticed this need was we created a standalone curriculum that's workforce based. So we create this curriculum in 16, it's delivered in 16 weeks on site at the employer, whether they provide a classroom or a conference room or whatever the case is. And then we embed some of their terminology, the employer's terminology, whether that's in a fulfillment center or a hospital or whatever the case is. This is how we help break down that growth barrier of language. And a lot of the other barriers that folks who consider themselves new Americans can run into is transportation. Maybe they don't have a driver's license. Fear of navigating a college campus. It can be large, and maybe you struggle reading the signs. And of course, that financial piece where the employer is paying for that programming cost up front, and it is not passed through to the students at all. One of the things that we have found, and I think this is a no-brainer, but sometimes it really helps to have the data that backs it, is that the most successful of these programs are through employers that are ultra supportive. We're talking the employers that are talking to the managers to say, hey, look, this is this really great program. These employees are signed up for it. Please make sure they can come off the line in time to do this. Please make sure that you can adjust their lunch break, and they're making sure that they're scheduling these classes with us or at a time that's convenient, whether it's during a shift change or on a lunch break. We even have employers that are paying hourly rates for their employees to come sit in the class with us. And when you eliminate that financial concern and that concern of a manager not allowing you to attend, guess what? It's a lot more successful. And again, the employer acts as a recruiter for this. Now, this basic English course, like I said, it is a standalone curriculum. This is an option that we have built to come in alongside of the other programs that we are already running, whether it's facilities maintenance or pharmacy tech or whatever the case is. We're introducing this as a supportive service, a wraparound offering for our employers that we're already have long-standing relationships with, and this has really taken off. You can go ahead and head out to the next slide. And I didn't want to leave you all today without some tips. I know this can be intimidating. How do you work this in a culture or a hemisphere in your city or in your area where maybe you don't have the working relationships with the employers that we do here at Columbus State? And I would say first, utilizes the resources already available. Use your boards, use your faculty. So many of our faculty here are practitioners, and that's just a natural, organic way to start that conversation. Get active in community workforce boards or other community conveners, a United Way, or if you have, like a workforce board or a workforce advisory council, get involved. And this third bullet, everybody's going to roll their eyes and say, yes, Erin, okay, cultivate an employment-focused mindset. And it's easier said than done. I hear you. But while so many of us love coming to college to learn, we're learning to get a job. We're learning to grow our financial ability to support our families and our lifestyle. So at the end of the day, that is the goal for our students. So creating that throughout the entire college and with faculty is key. Be flexible. All of the different types of partnerships and development ways that Lana outlined before, we do all of that. We know that we do a lot of things really, really well. And we know that the employers do a lot of things really, really well. So if what we're both doing well doesn't communicate and it doesn't have a crosswalk between them, then it doesn't make any sense for the student. So sometimes the employer doesn't know that we have the thing that they're looking for. Sometimes we don't know that we're not doing what the employer is looking for. So being flexible in that space and figuring out how can we make this happen with the resources that we have. If possible, develop a department focused on bridging that gap. Something like our Office of Talent Strategy or my smaller group partnerships and programs. My whole job, our whole team's job, is to develop these spaces for these incumbent workers or our open enrollment students to get them connected through an earn and learn model at our partner employers. Always keep in mind when you're developing these programs, have a pipeline for the incumbent workforce and for new talent, because the incumbent space is a very shallow well. So once that's up and running, find a way to bring in your open enrollment students. And that might mean going to your employer saying, if this is a possibility, what could a tuition reimbursement model look for? Figure out a way for that employer to be the draw for those open enrollment students. And then my last thing I'm going to leave you guys with is that no one wants to be first. No company wants to be the first organization to start these, because what if it fails, right? Because a lot of times this comes with a lot of fanfare, maybe some media attention, and you don't want it to fail. But once you get that first successful partnership, more will follow, and that I promise. And then my contact information is on the next slide. There is my email. If you have any questions or want to pick my brain or have any thoughts, please go ahead and send me an email. I'd love to learn from you all as well. We're only in this together as much as we want to communicate and collaborate. So I'm always here for that. Thank you so much, Lana.
Thanks so much, Erin. So our next presenter is Alicia from Bismarck. I'm going to forward your slide here. Okay.
So good afternoon. My name is Alicia Udy, and I am the Polytechnic Programs Outreach Director here at BSC. So just a little bit about Bismarck State College, if you want to advance the next slide. We are a community college located in Bismarck, North Dakota, and we just completed another blizzard. So if you've been watching any weather, it has been a horrific winter for us, but we have roughly around 3,800 students, both campus and online together. So we serve our local state, but also have been known to have a national footprint in our energy programming. So just the base of what I'm going to talk about is really our engagement with industry. And as our community college is transitioning to a polytechnic institution, you'll see on your screen, and what I really want to highlight is every one of our bullets of what we consider polytechnic education. And as we design and develop new programming and update our current programming, you can see the engagement that we really involve industry with. So they're involved to help us define that programming and what are those knowledge, skills, and abilities that our students need to have in any of our degrees, whether it's a short-term certificate all the way up to a bachelor's degree. Being able to embed industry recognized credentials within our programming, including short-term certificates, is a high priority for us. And also making sure that we're meeting the needs of not only industry, but our students in developing programs that are flexible and adaptable. Most of our students, as kind of has been mentioned on here, we're seeing a trend of more part-time students. The average age of our students, it keeps increasing. So we're average age is about 24 years old. So we're seeing what the colleagues on this call today are mentioning too, about more adult learners, more part-time students. And so when we're developing programming to meet the industry needs, how can we make sure that we're being flexible, adaptable, and making sure that the training and education that we're providing really is meeting a specific employer need? Next slide, please. So to do this work, what we did is we've basically integrated what we call a business and industry leadership team model. And so a little different than what you'd consider a traditional advisory committee. This model really puts workforce and industry at the top of the table to basically give us the input that they want in their programming. So what you'll see here is we created in the center of that diagram is a leadership team. This leadership team has top executives from private industry focusing on our key sector areas, which include energy, health sciences, agriculture, manufacturing, automation, and cybersecurity. So we have 2 to 3 reps from each of those sectors that are in a high executive level position. In addition, we have representation from our governor's office, our North Dakota chamber, our local chamber. We have our Department of Public Instruction, which oversees our K-12 education. We have our career and tech ed on that board, also the director of our Career Tech Ed board. We have, in addition to that, then we have, I'm trying to think who else I'm missing. I think that's about it. So trying to create both from an industry and private sector, and then from public education, all those leaders coming together to really guide us on what they see as future needs for programming. And so from this team, then we break off into our sectors. So each of our sectors has a team made up of 12 to 15 industry representatives that are also in executive types of positions. And then within those teams, we also bring with us representations from our Career and Tech Ed and K-12 education systems. And then from there goes the advisory committee. So there's still value and input to having the advisory committees on our campus that are really honing in maybe more on the program, learning outcomes, talking about the graduates, involved in hiring our students, and basically the people that are working with our students every day in our programming. And so those committees still exist, and a rep basic from those committees then serves on the sector committees, and then somebody from the sector serves on this large leadership build team. Next slide, please. And so when we look at our built team, the industry reps, they actually lead the committee. So each of those committees is led by industry reps. They set the agenda and they drive the meeting, and staff like myself and faculty, we sit in the background and we listen to what they have to say. So they're at each once a year, they basically develop what we call knowledge, skills, and ability, KSAs, for us to make sure that our program areas for those primary sectors are focusing on. And so we do that through an engaged survey activity with feedback. And then those are really to focus on what they see 12 to 36 months from now. And so when we think about education, a lot of times we have been known to be reactive to a need that industry is telling us about, and instead we want to be proactive. So we are challenging those industry leaders to really think into the future and what are those skills that you want to be taught into the program. So with that, they're predicting obviously trends and market demand and where they see their business growing and those needs. And then from there, our faculty take those KSAs, they cross-reference it to our current curriculum, update it as needed, and then provide that membership or that feedback back to the build team itself. And so it's a very engaged process where industry is telling us what our programming needs to have. Our faculty are listening. They're responding by sharing how we're going to integrate that into our programs and what that looks like into the future. And so when those, I think industry, sometimes when we're working as education and industry, sometimes we get too much in the weeds. Education wants to know, well, how many credits is that? How long is that program? Is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 1 year? And sometimes those are the conversations that really hold us back, maybe in an advisory type of committee. And so you kind of pull that all away and really let business industry focus on what they know. And that's really the skills and abilities of their employees. And then when you take that back, then you can have those internal conversations that are very education based and bring back to the committee then what you would recommend based off of what you heard from them. Okay, next slide. So another thing that we also, when we think about 12 to 36 months from now, I just thought I'd share this diagram. This really hones in on a lot of the work we're doing when we're looking at 12 to 36 months from now, and that's Industry 4.0 skills. It was really developed by the manufacturing industry, and the skills in the inside are all skills that we are actually hearing all of those sectors on the outside circle talk about how they're impacting the skills and abilities of their employees. And so a lot of times you would see those as more upskilling. So not only are we trying to look at what is our programming for our students that are entering the education system, but how can we also upskill current employees? And so we challenge our business partners to make sure that they're considering these types of skills also when they're looking into the future. Next slide. So with that, and I will show you how we did this, within a year and a half, BSC developed 26 new degrees, ranging from certificates all the way to bachelor's degree. And so for us, this was a daunting challenge, but in the state of North Dakota, like everybody else is being faced with, there is definitely talent shortages it's probably the biggest strain on businesses to develop, to grow and expand, is really talent. And so when we brought this to our partners and shared with them this built model and let them go and give us that advice that we needed to hear, from that came 26 new degrees in just over 1 year. All right, next slide. So when we developed these new degrees that you saw on that screen, this is the model that we did it in. And so here I'm just going to display a cybersecurity pathway model that we use. So at the base of this diagram, you see employer and public-private partnerships. They drive everything that we do. All of our programming is really driven from industry and hearing what industry has to tell us that they need. On the left-hand side, when we are thinking about our students, it can start as early as K-12. You have your traditional college students, and then we have employees. And so when we're developing programming and thinking how to best package what we can have to offer, best meet a skill that has been identified by industry, this is basically what you see is what you have in front of us. If you kind of go to the right-hand side where you see this solid green column, there you see a standard cyber associate degree. And so in this particular program, when we worked with business and industry, we already had a 2-year degree in cybersecurity and a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. As an institution, I don't think we would ever veer away from having standard 2-year and 4-year degrees in that traditional model that they're going to come. They're probably going to be a student for 2 years. Classes fall, spring, potentially summer, that traditional model. So we always want to have that model there and available to them, and hopefully making sure that every 2-year degree can lead to a 4-year degree and then potentially even excel past that. So then where it gets different and what we've really changed and adapted is what you see starting at the left. So basically what we heard from industry is they had a number of cybersecurity skills that they were looking for, not only for entry-level positions, but also to upskill for people that are already in some type of IT role or computer support role that really needed more cybersecurity background. And so what we did is we heard what those skills were, and we basically in this particular program developed 5 short-term certificates. And so as we began to talk to industry and hearing about those certificates, we realized that those certificates could be stacked on top of each other to meet a particular need that maybe that industry partner had, and or to maybe meet the interest of our students. And so we broke those skill sets down into these short-term certificates. Now, when we think about funding and the expense of education, that sometimes becomes challenging for individuals, especially those that have barriers. And so when we develop our short-term certificates, we always want to make sure that they don't only meet a particular skill set that industry has identified to us, but also that there's 16 credits in length, which allows them to be short-term or financial aidable. And so this is how we basically built those out. So they're at least 16 credits. And so what you see on kind of the left hand up to that green standard column is where the students basically can stack 3 short-term certificates on top of general education, and they can earn an associate's degree in advanced digital technologies. And so they can customize their degree. Employers can send maybe their employees back to BSC to earn certain certificates or earn a certain credential that then can be built on into a degree. And that customized degree then leads into credits. Those credits apply towards the standard cyber associate's degree and then into the bachelor's degree. The other little thing I'll point out is when we try to pull out a certificate and make it available in K-12. So you'll see the first column there, cybersecurity fundamentals and mobile apps. Both of those certificates, we worked with our career and tech ed partners and our K-12 partners to offer those as early entry and dual credit in high school. And so this will be our first year in May, we will have students graduating actually with a college credential in high school before they graduate from high school, because our graduation is prior to theirs. And so that opportunity to start engaging in that education model at a lower tuition rate, and also be potentially enter the workforce faster for industry was very much of interest to not only our industry partners, but also students in that K-12 system. Next slide, please. And we also just did this in health sciences. So it's another example where it works really similar the same way. CNA, which this can be taken in high school. I don't have that part of the graphic updated, but they can start as a CNA. From a CNA, they could become a CMA, maybe they become a dialysis tech. That could lead into potentially be an EMT or practical nursing. And so I think using this model, we have found that those maybe even with barriers or where finances could be challenging, going back to college seems very daunting, and looking at, I don't know if I can go to school for 2 full years and completely quit my job. Well, let's start getting you some credentials, get you employed in the industry. Maybe they have support to help pay for your education, get you some exposure, build their confidence, maybe in that career path that they're looking for. And then how does that lead up to potentially continuing? And if they so choose to stay at that position with that industry recognized credential, and in that role, obviously that's great. They've met their needs. But if they want to continue their education, that we always have a path to go forward. Next slide. So that kind of rounds up just the approach that we're taking on short-term credentials to meet not only the demands that industry has and trying to train talent quicker and get them into the workforce quicker. But I also think it's been very much of interest to those in both in the K-12, your traditional student pathway, and the adult learners, to be able to break down that education pathway and see that ability to finish a credential and have a skill that they can apply, and then continuing that education. So with that, I welcome any questions, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing these great models with us, and all of your experiences with our audience today. One question from our Q&A is related to employer tuition assistance, particularly around, okay, these are non-credit programs that we're talking about. Let's say you have an employer tuition assistance program that requires you to pay upfront for your tuition. How do you handle that if a student really doesn't have other resources that they can turn to pay for that upfront money? And just maybe broadening that question, how do you work with employers to leverage those tuition dollars that they could potentially to pay for this kind of training?
Sure, I'll pop in here. So we operate in 2 different ways kind of in that space. So the one would be like a voucher sponsorship model. So one of our largest partners provide a voucher for their students. So again, the student can come in, and it's good for basic English or English as a second language classes. So they can come with this document in hand, ready to rock. There's no pass through there. The other approach that we take is that true program model, where the classes are cohorted and the employer will pay that cohort rate, that program rate, with that admin fee for any class that has between 7 and 25 students in it, no matter how many, or where that lands. So that's the way we've worked around that. In the non-credit space, again, it is a trickier place to be. But again, combating that and getting the flexibility is just to say, hey, look, like, maybe you don't know that financial aid can't cover this, to the employer. And that's how the ESL portion of that voucher came to be. One of the employers had a very strong hard line, like, we are not paying for anything that's non-credit. This has to be credit bearing. And then we launched that on-site ESL, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. Not only can we do this, but it's cheaper than the cohort program, right? And we can send a voucher in and everything's gravy, right? So seeing that progress has been really, really uplifting and promising. But again, I think it's just getting out in front of those employers and saying, I don't think that you know this. Did you know that financial aid is not going to cover non-credit?
And you also had the pre-reimbursement model. Do you want to share what that means and how that works?
Sure. So, and it's not a short-term credit, or it's not a short-term credential, but it's with a bachelor's degree program that is a three-pronged collaboration between us, Franklin University, and Huntington National Bank. And again, that's where they bring us the people, we register them, we put a hold on their account. We call it an award code, so that those students don't get dropped for non-payment. And then after the last drop date, after our last census date of the semester, we send a direct invoice over to Huntington National Bank. So that's what we call a pre-reimbursement. So from the front end, the student isn't going to feel that impact.
But those are on the 4-credit programs. And it's on the
Yes.
non-credit programs where you have to sort of get the employer to kind of view things a little differently.
Yes, yes. So, and one of the things that we've really found is that they find a value in us registering the students, us buying the books for the students. So typically they're really game for paying that program fee, that cohorted program fee. And instead of going through the financial aid office with that invoicing, we just go directly through our cashier.
Anybody else want to talk about sort of how you work with employers on their, to sort of recognize their your programs and your short-term programs, your non-credit programs with their, employer assistance programs?
I'll jump in briefly. Through our programs that we have with Career Connected Learning, they're all focused on impacting income disparity, and so we do not charge our students for courses up through the equivalent of 18 credit hours or a level 1 certificate, whether that's credit or non-credit. And so we have different grants and funding throughout our institution that helps take care of those costs for any learner that's coming through our program. And so that helps us a lot, with students and coming in, enrolling into a career. But we also work with some companies with their tuition reimbursement programs. We have different prior learning assessments that we have with different organizations that the different certifications are things that they have employer trained so they can get college credit. And then those students continue their education and through Dallas College. And we have a model set up where they pay for all those students like at the end of the semester. And so we put a perk or a hold on those accounts for those students that are participating. And then at the end of the semester, that the company will pay for their tuition. So those are some of the things that we're doing at Dallas College to help with that.
I think I would just add that for us, having business tell us what those short-term training and certifications need to be obviously helps with that payment process. So then a lot of times they're more interested in using, if it's whether their HR budgets or their training budgets to support that. The prior learning assessment has been really big for Bismarck State in regards to saying we give prior learning credit. And so all of these non-credit pathways lead into a credit pathway, and they're the same. We have credit students mixed with non-credit students in many of the certificates that I shared with you. And so I think when employers see that too, that option of maybe why that individual doesn't want to go the credit route and wants to choose a non-credit route, they're maybe more willing to pay up front or be part of that conversation. And then really try to expand into some apprenticeship programming in both the areas that I shared with you and others. And so when it becomes a part of an apprenticeship program, then it's more considered training, and then that becomes easier too for them to use their tuition model reimbursement, or however they want to work internally with those funding. So I think all of those work. And then lastly, and every state is different, but one thing that I think we have learned through this process is a lot of these programs that you're developing is to support in-demand occupations that your state is struggling meeting the talent needs. And so there is just funding coming in many different realms. And so how do we keep those state entities and those economic development entities involved, because they are sometimes aware of other funding sources? And so how do we bring that together? And then especially when you're working with underrepresented, how do you share that with them and make sure they understand those resources? So that's sometimes too where your career coaches or your advisors or whatever position that might be called at your institution can support those individuals. And I think some colleges don't have as many resources on the non-credit side as the credit side. But when you can bring these programming together and not really treat them differently if they're credit or non-credit, you see that leveraging all those resources happen so much quicker and easier, and really at the end, who benefits? The individual, the student, whether they're off the street, employed already, or whoever that might be. And so I think those are a few of my takeaways that I've seen over the past year.
All right, we have time for maybe a few lightning round questions. So lightning round number one, are any of you doing anything with respect to these kinds of short-term credentials that tie them to anything like registered apprenticeships?
Yes, we're just beginning that.
Yes, we've tied that to Department of Labor registered apprenticeships, and we started with nursing, and we've gone from there. And so we have everything from nursing to heavy equipment operator, aligning those short-term credentials, making sure that we can get people into the workforce and start getting paid.
Second lightning round question is related to sort of modality. So when you're looking at your non-credit programs, are they all online? Are they self-paced? Are they in person? Are they a mix of everything? How is it shaping up at your institutions?
At Columbus State, it's both and, all and, depending on what the certificate is, right? I mean, you don't want to go to STNA school completely virtual. You got to get your hands in there, right? But if you're getting an IT certification, it makes sense for it to be completely virtual, right? So it's all.
Same at Bismarck, I would say it's all, and then more online synchronous so that they can have that opportunity to engage, even if it's recorded or different times. So I think COVID made us maybe challenged us in doing more with online and like kind of that synchronous or hybrid approach, but I would say all modalities based off of the program, as Aaron noted.
Yeah. We have a few other questions. I think some of them are kind of answered by a report. So if you're on Kale's mailing list, you'll receive an email next week with a link to our new report. One of the questions is related to sort of credit for prior learning from other methods, how that's woven into these degrees. Alana mentioned in her presentation how we're sort of trying to sort of recognize how institutions are linking credit for prior learning, whether it's from ACE credit recommendations or from individualized assessments or other methods. So there's we do address that in our report. And then there's some questions about how whether programs are using micro credentials in these pathways. We do talk quite a bit about sort of short-term credentials, and they come in lots of different forms. Maybe not the same definition as micro credentials, but we spend a lot of time in the report talking about all the ways that these 10 institutions are making decisions about about which programs to provide, which credentials to provide, which micro credentials to provide, who's helping, what kind of data sources they're using to make those decisions. And so we think that's going to be an interesting part of the report for all of you. So I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for all of your time on this webinar, and really glad we were able to share this work with you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.